So I'm going to ask Eric and Tom to unmute themselves, and we'll get started with the Q&A session.
Awesome. Thanks, Gene. Hey, Eric, how's it going?
Hey, good morning, everyone.
All right. So to start this off, one of the questions that always comes to mind is, there's this sort of myth out there that, InfoSec naturally competes with DevOps principles intended to accelerate application release, that, you can't get a lot of, you can't get all the security you need, if you're trying to get applications out the door quickly. So, I mean, can you talk to that, and talk to that balance between, application development velocity and security?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like DevOps is actually the ideal place, if you will, to put security and to talk about security. It's been demonstrated that security people with the right tools and the right automation have the ability to inject that into the conversation earlier, way earlier in the development process. That helps eliminate risk prior to application release, which of course builds stronger applications, much more secure processes, and things that are going to survive over time and be able to be adopted better.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's almost like it falls into that category of, measure twice and cut once.
Exactly.
Like
That's a great way to put it.
So you can leave it till later, but I mean, just as you're trying to uncover issues in the code itself, that have, other deficiencies, et cetera, I don't understand, how security is really that much different, because when you look at the consequence management of a major breach or something like that, and then having to roll back and go back and do it right the next time, I mean, that seems a lot harder than kind of getting it right the first time. So,
Yep, definitely agree with that.
So there's another myth that adopting DevOps eliminates the need for security experts. What do you think about that?
Well, when I think about that statement, the thing that comes to mind for me is travel and standing in line at the airport security. We all get frustrated when the line at TSA is huge, and most of us probably, because we're human, we think TSA is trying to prevent us from getting on the airplane, when in reality what they are is kind of like the gatekeeper. They're the security for the entire airline system, and what they're trying to do is make sure that everyone that boards the plane is the people that are supposed to be there, rather than the people that are out there trying to cause trouble. If you kind of think about DevOps and security in that viewpoint, it really feels more like the two of them are built or designed together. I mean, they should be designed together and managed in the same process and things of that nature. I mean, it helps, I think, developers build and release better applications. It helps the security individuals to realize the relationship that's required between security and DevOps to help kind of increase the velocity of all of the development process.
Yeah, I like that analogy with the airport, because I'm a frequent flyer and traveler, and I've been accused of, wanting to shorten the security line myself. I also look at it from a sales perspective. One of the things that we're trying to do is, get software out the door, get it in the hands of customers, get it deployed, et cetera. But, we also have pretty strong engineering principles here where, we try to vet, what the salesperson is actually suggesting or presenting to the customer, rather than just close as many deals as you possibly can. Obviously, there needs to be oversight there. And, we try very hard to apply engineering principles and say, okay, it's not just about selling as fast as you can, but it's like getting the customer exactly what they need. So there's always that sort of gating factor, but I think it's really important.
Yeah, if you think about that even just a little bit further from the airline and TSA analogy, they offer pre-check, they offer clear. I mean, there are tools, if you will, to help people dare I say, bypass the security. It's not really bypassing, it's getting them through it even faster. Which from the DevOps and DevSecurity perspective, we might be missing part of that. I mean, there may be things that we could do possibly to speed that up even more in a secure manner, though.
Yeah, I mean, you know, thinking out loud, maybe there is, you know, certification processes, et cetera, that allow us to evaluate, you know, someone's attention to detail when it comes to security. And, you know, when people have proven themselves to be more trustworthy, you know, there may be something there. That's a good point.
Right. Yep.
Next myth: if we can do DevOps, we can do SecOps.
Yeah, you know, that's a myth for a good reason. And I think that thought process really highlights the goal, if you will, of cross-functional integration. And if you think about it from that perspective, where if we can do one, we can do the other, you're not really putting the two together. And I think that's where the big benefit really comes in. You get security teams who partner with developer teams from the very beginning of the process. And what you're doing there really is setting a strong standard for the entire organization. And I think that's the key in this case is make sure you're working properly, make sure you're doing it together, make sure the teams really communicate well with each other. I think that helps to speed up the whole process, but and again, it helps make it much more robust and more secure overall.
Absolutely. So what events and urgencies or policy shifts have, you know, really caused us to double down on DevSecOps, you know, as a methodology, and you know, really climb the list of priorities? You know, we're starting to see it especially in the regulated industries, but really across all markets. But you know, government, financial services, et cetera. But you know, what do you see as having brought this trend to the forefront more recently?
You know, everybody talks about the impact of COVID, and I think with regards to this particular line of thought, COVID really was a wake-up call for companies, but not really necessarily from a cyber threat perspective, but almost more from a physical threat perspective. But what that really helped organizations like Salesforce do was to be able to build applications to track and trace and monitor people, like thousands and millions of people all over the place, and elevated that privacy concern to a super high level. I mean, Salesforce just recently brought in-person events back into the world of conferences and things like that. I mean, I attended their Dreamforce event in New York City last week. Everybody that attended had to upload their vaccination card prior to the event. They had to get a COVID test prior to the event, and on day one of the event, everybody had to pass all of these things. And all of that was managed through an application written on Salesforce. And needless to say, written very quickly because of how the world had changed so much because of COVID. I mean, and this was done through the low code, no code platform that everybody's kind of getting used to now with Salesforce. And it impacts everyone, not just private sector or public sector. I mean, so these kind of threats really are much broader than just cyber threats. There was an article I read recently that talked about Interpol and how they were tracking spam messages, and somewhere in the neighborhood of over 900,000 spam messages were discovered over the last like 6 to 9 months that were all related to COVID. And they tied them all back to this thought of nation hacking, or the state level bad actors, as some people refer to them. So it's amazing how broad this thing has really gotten, and the need for the strong security really just keeps increasing.
Yeah, and I mean, this whole COVID situation it's caused us to balance, you know, critical infrastructure, critical resource protection against privacy and things like that, you know. And you know, how can you get applications out? How can you design new policies and things like that very quickly? without looking at, the privacy issues and the issues around civil liberties and things like that. So it's a real challenge. I mean, it's just all of a sudden it's like, boom, kind of it's in some way similar to development of vaccines and other, treatment modalities. We're cutting corners. We're having to do that, just from an urgency perspective. But, it's like, that's always the balance that you have. It's like rush something out the door, but it's like, do we have time to consider all of the different ramifications and things like that? And so in the context of this, it's, privacy, it's like contact tracing and various other things. I mean, in healthcare, there's HIPAA standards and things like that, should be addressed, but it's really challenging to balance those compliance issues with the urgency of getting something out the door, whether it's an application, a method or policy, or, even some new piece of hardware. So.
Right, exactly. Yep.
So this is the question I think everybody wants to know, and probably how to do it, but why are people finding DevSecOps such a challenge out there?
Yeah, we've discussed a lot about the kind of the melding of InfoSec and DevOps practices, but you can't trivialize the challenge of bringing those two together, simply because it's like fundamentally different human elements, each one with their own mindset, their own goals, metrics, their own tools. But what you need to kind of remember is organizations are now trying to break down barriers that have been there for years. I mean, think about Germany. This, if you want to call this a Berlin Wall situation, that's kind of what comes to mind for me. Is the two groups had been isolated for so long, sharing a similar corporate language and, if you will, but different mentalities around that, and they're suddenly thrown together in the hopes of creating something bigger than both of them through effective collaboration. And that's a big challenge right there. I mean, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, I guess you could say. And technologists, we love tackling challenges. Those of you that are super technical, that are out there building things with code and all that, I think you probably even enjoy those kind of cyber challenges more than others. But in general, I think humans rise to challenges, and they always love to build things and create things that are going to take things to a higher level, especially when there's some version of discipline involved, some things that they certainly have to maintain. Back to the previous question and the comments about HIPAA, I mean, all of those security concerns, privacy concerns are all things that need to be kept in mind and taken into heart when you're building all these tools.
Yeah, it reminds me of work I did in a previous life on panels where it was a similar challenge of bringing different security domains together. We were trying to. There's this new concept called cyber physical security or physical cyber security, depending on how you look at it. But it's more of a holistic model, right? But when you get the physical security folks in the room with the cyber security folks, I mean, it's so different, I mean, and so it's an educational thing. And I think that getting back to the DevSecOps, if we can start earlier and training developers with security in mind, I think that we need to introduce, courses and methodologies and things like that say this isn't just about getting the product out as fast as possible. If we took that, if that was the attitude with creating, cars or other machinery, we would have a lot of liability issues right now. It's not just about how fast can I get the car off the assembly line. I mean, people are obviously monitored and graded on certain aspects of that job. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to say if this thing's going to drive and not drive off the road when you don't expect it. So, we've built that level of attention and oversight into other manufacturing processes. So this is just not brand new, right? And we're going to have to address the same thing, the same assembly and monitoring principles, within the development domain, within the software development domain. I mean, it's just it's still assembly, right? It's still manufacturing to some extent. It's just different style. So we've done it in other manufacturing domains. We've introduced security and oversight and safety and things like that. I mean, I think we just need to take lessons from some of those industries and say, how can we model what they've done? Because in some cases they had to go back and re-engineer the process, and that's kind of like what we're going to have to do here. But developers are coming out of school, and if they don't have the right mentality because they don't have the right education, then I think we're going to need to start making that part of the curriculum, and not just how fast can you develop. I think developers are sometimes, they're admired or graded based on how fast they can put something out. We're always like, wow, that developer does 3 times the work of somebody else. But it's like we still have to look at, it's not just about bugs per se, but it's like, are we following the best security principles when we're doing that?
Right. I think there's one more decent physical example of this that probably most of us take for granted, and that's the entire prescription drug industry. I mean, you think about the process companies go through when they're doing the research and creating new drugs, but then also think about that from you as the consumer perspective. When you walk into the pharmacy with that prescription in hand and you hand it over to them, the process that they go through and the procedures they follow to make sure that you are the person who the prescription is for, but way beyond that you're getting the drug that your doctor has prescribed and in the proper strengths and the proper number of pills. And I think the whole like Six Sigma thought process was almost built around the pharmacy industry, which kind of goes back to that whole measure twice and do it once aspect and thought process. I mean, this, granted, it's a physical security type of thing, but I think it still really ties in well to this conversation of getting it right the first time and doing it quickly, and how well the two can actually go hand in hand if all the proper things are put in place.
Yeah, I remember, personal example back from when I bought my first house, and I was talking to one of my neighbors, and he discovered a crack in his foundation, and he went out and got bids from different contractors, and he said, "Oh, well, this guy's going to get the work. He's half the amount, and he can do it twice as fast." And I said, "Well, this is the foundation of your house, so I'm not sure that's exactly the principal criteria. You probably don't want anybody cutting corners on that." And
exactly right.
I think the same thing can be said here. And again, I mean, I think with some training, I think we can introduce a proper amount of security oversights and attention without greatly impacting the application velocity. And we'll learn how to deal with that, and you're talking about quality control and Six Sigma, and it's been written thousands of times about, the car industry and, how we learn to build cars faster, how, Japanese started adapting some of these principles, and then soon they went across the entire car industry. Same type of thing. It's like, how do you stop the assembly line if you find a fault, but then, not sacrifice too much, getting the cars off the end of the assembly line.
Right.
It was hard at first, and then we learned the tricks, and we got better and better at it. But we got to start somewhere, is the way I look at it, So we got to start educating developers at the education level, and in school, and then we have to just adjust as we go and figure out how to optimize the process.
Yep.
So do you find that the native Salesforce apps, do offer more security than the non-native Salesforce apps?
Well, I think the advantage of a native Salesforce app, obviously it's built 100% inside Salesforce, so there's no need for any integration. The data is all stored in Salesforce rather than external, where additional vulnerabilities might happen on those external servers. So yeah, I really feel like if you can stay native to Salesforce, that's better. The fewer places that your data goes, that it's stored, is a better result and a much more secure environment. Yeah, definitely native all the way, I would say.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we try to overcome, and with cloud applications in general. As fast as cloud adoption has occurred in the regulated industries, we still see concern, and having to talk people into using cloud applications sometimes as opposed to on-prem, which is, for so many reasons, it's ideal. It's much better than on-prem, but the people that are clinging to that sort of on-prem principle, it's the concern about having it not just in one cloud, but potentially in multiple clouds, where the data is traversing, right? Because that introduces a lot more vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and I think the people that are still clinging to that on-prem philosophy feel like that gives them more control over it, even though you and I both know that that's not really true.
Right. So, I mean, given where we're headed, with attempting to, sort of fuse these two different principles, what do you see that the customer is asking more for in terms of, platform, tools, applications, capabilities, et cetera? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it seems like what I've experienced over the last, well, probably close to 10 years now, most of my time in this ecosystem. The first question, it seems like it always gets asked when you're talking about a new tool or a new application is it native? And it goes, I think, beyond just the built-in security aspect of being native to Salesforce, but I think that also there's a lot more things that you can do within a native app, within a product that's built on Salesforce. I mean, you can take advantage of the same security models that core Salesforce functionality utilizes, and there's no, like we just mentioned earlier, there's no additional integration. There's no programming that you need to do to make that happen. It just happens because you're native. And I really feel like the tools that are out there today, there's hundreds of apps on the App Exchange, well, probably thousands in reality. Some of them are native, some of them are not. And I wouldn't be too surprised to discover if you're researching a very specific tool and you look at all of the options that are available to you, you're going to find at least one or two options that are native. And my gut tells me that you're going to find the customers that are utilizing those native apps are probably more happy with what they see and more satisfied with the solution that it's providing for their specific needs.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when we go to talk to InfoSec, reviewers, they tend to focus very intently on, those interface points. And again, if you're going from this cloud environment to this cloud environment to someplace else, those points of interface, or where the API is trying to access something from another environment, that tends to catch people's attention immediately. And the more of that's occurring, the longer the scrutiny and review is going to last, right? And
right. Yeah,
and it can become a gauntlet, if you have to address every one of those points of,
And the more, I mean, if you think about it, each one of those handoffs is one more point of potential failure, and if you can eliminate those or minimize those, everything's going to run much more smoothly.
Right. So, with more regulations at the state and at the federal level, I mean, some like HIPAA and GDPR have been around for a while. Data residency, et cetera. What's been the impact in terms of on your customers, in terms of applications, et cetera? I mean, are you seeing an increased degree of concern around that, or how are you addressing that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's been a more concern over those issues, in particular in those regulated industries or where regulations like GDPR play, for sure. But I keep going back to this the security that's built into Salesforce, and working with those within those regulated environments or industries just becomes easier when you know what you're starting with, when you know native apps can be built and take advantage of the same security, and through DevOps processes tied into all of that, you can still do rapid development of applications in a secure manner that's going to satisfy HIPAA or the California privacy laws or GDPR. I mean, there's customers all around the world, from Salesforce certainly, utilizing tools that are touching those regulated areas.
Yeah, and I mean, we left off, one of the real important ones here that we actually use to sort of borrow our, this security posture, and that's FedRAMP at the federal level. Yep. Who, even the state governments are starting to look at now in lieu of, a single state standard, which they're trying to put together. But it's amazing how, people in the regulated industry outside of government are actually looking at FedRAMP. And again, it gets back to that, okay, if you trust Salesforce, if you trust the Salesforce cloud from a secure platform standpoint, then, whatever native applications are living in there, I mean, we're basically just inheriting those controls, right? So as long as we can show that we're not going out again and doing something with that data, and in fact, to allay the fears of some of our customers in those industries, we literally put into our contracts, into our MSAs, we cannot touch or manipulate your data in any way. I mean, it's basically, you're the only ones that can touch this. Once it's deployed in that cloud, we have no way of getting at it, of exposing it in any way. It's interesting. I've everybody knows about contact tracing and these applications that are developed, a lot of times in the state and local environment. And we've been talking to hospital systems now, and they're doing building their own contact tracing on top of Salesforce. And it's not just COVID. I mean, they're preparing for, other potential incidents, et cetera, other biohazards, you name it. And so for them to be able to stand that up quickly, I think it makes a big difference to know that all that data is in one place. If you have to do it quickly and then say, oh, by the way, there's a number of like you said, handoffs going on, there's a much larger security concern. So I think, the native aspect has helped with getting, and the low code, no code have worked together very well to be able to develop those applications much, much faster in a Salesforce environment than some of the other platforms that you compete against.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there.
So another aspect of this sort of native application, I mean, how do you see, what are the benefits for not having to go outside of Salesforce and actually leveraging tools within Salesforce like Einstein and, for security and DORA reporting?
Yeah, to me, I feel like if you can keep everything inside Salesforce, obviously reporting is going to be simpler. Now you don't have to worry about pulling data or going through some integration tool to get access to additional data to be able to do your reporting. But just over the last several years with the recent addition, if you will, of Einstein and all the reporting capabilities that are built into that, and even now Tableau CRM as part of Salesforce with its advanced dashboarding and display process possibilities for displaying the data and reporting on it. I think that really helps organizations understand better how important security is, but how you can build things around it, how you can understand the impact it's having on your business, on your customers, and figuring all that out through the ability to dive into all of this data and create reports and dashboards that make sense out of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, look, Salesforce, I think, does a brilliant job, probably a better job of almost anybody else I know, or any institution, of training people very quickly. I mean, it's one of the most innovative parts of Salesforce is, and you all do such a great job of training folks on Salesforce and on the various aspects and the different applications and things like that. So I think from a time to productivity standpoint, if you're trained on the Salesforce platform and you understand the functionality and the UI and the tools that Salesforce provides, I think it makes it much, it makes for a much faster deployment process when you're tying together those similar tools that you're already familiar with, as opposed to having to go out and learn other applications. So, and it's certainly helped us. I mean, we've obviously hitched our cart to the Salesforce horse, so to speak. And I mean, our folks are Salesforce experts in every, in every aspect. And so it's helped us. And that's one of the reasons that we made the decision to use those internal tools, because we understood them and we didn't want to have to go out. And we find that those applications do everything we need from a reporting and auditing standpoint.